They called it too wild, too fast, too smart for its own good. And in Japan, they quietly shut it down. What made this little 250cc engine so dangerous that Honda had to restrict it, hide it behind software, and eventually let it fade away? Well, you're about to find out exactly what happened with the NSR250R engine and why it was banned from the streets it was built to dominate. Let's go back to the late 1980s. Honda was on fire. Their GP bikes were crushing it in the 250cc World Championship. Fans were obsessed, so Honda did something bold. They created a street-legal version for the everyday rider. That bike was the NSR250R, and it came with an engine that screamed like a race bike, but was packed into a frame you could license and ride to work, or at least you were supposed to. From the very first MC16 in 1987, the NSR250R used a 249 cubic centimeter, 90-degree V-twin, liquid-cooled two-stroke engine with a reed valve induction system and Honda's RC valve. The reed valves gave it snappy low-end response, while the RC valve adjusted exhaust timing for more power at high RPMs. It made the engine flexible, explosive, and addictively sharp once you passed 7,000 RPM. By the time the 1989 MC18 rolled out, Honda had fine-tuned the engine's internal flow. They kept the bore and stroke nearly square, 54 millimeters by 54.5 millimeters. That meant perfect balance between torque and high-rev power. And with a compression ratio tailored for quick detonation, the bike delivered an unrestricted 57 horsepower. But that's not what people on the streets were getting. In Japan, regulations capped street-legal two-strokes at just 45 horsepower. So Honda added physical restrictions, and later, electronic ones. You had a bike capable of race-level power, but it was choked down before it could breathe. And that's where the real story starts. See, while the MC18 used the PGM2 ignition system, a smart system that mapped the ignition curve based on throttle position and RPM, the next generation, the MC21, took it to a new level. The MC21 introduced the PGM3, and this wasn't just a little upgrade. It came with a throttle position sensor and gear position sensor feeding data into the ECU. That allowed the bike to adjust power delivery based on how hard you were twisting the throttle and which gear you were in. For 1990, this was space-age tech. You, the rider, were directly controlling a mini-race computer every time you shifted. But that was still just a warm-up. In 1994, Honda dropped the MC28, and that's where things got complicated. This model looked like the real NSR500GP bike. It had the famous single-sided pro-arm swing arm, which was borrowed straight from the endurance racing RC30. But it also introduced something that changed everything: the PGM4 system. And this one didn't use a normal key. It used a smart card. Yes, a plastic card. Not just to start the bike, but to tell the ECU what kind of engine map to run. The idea was that you could swap cards based on the weather or the track you were racing on. One card for dry, one for rain, one for low RPM torque. That's what they claimed. But under the hood, the truth was different. What the PGM4 system really did was lock the bike's power output. Even though the engine itself was capable of over 55 horsepower, Honda choked it down to meet strict Japanese regulations. And because the software was locked to the card, de-restricting the bike became a nightmare. Unlike earlier models where you could just swap pipes or tweak a CDI box, the MC28 needed custom cards, rewired ECUs, or even illegal racing hacks to unlock full power. And yes, people found ways around it, but it took time, money, and a whole lot of reverse engineering. But why go through all that effort? Why not just ride something easier? Because the NSR250R didn't feel like anything else on the road. We're talking about a dry weight of just 132 kilograms and razor-sharp steering geometry. 23 degrees of rake, 87 millimeters of trail. The MC21's gull arm swing arm let the expansion chambers snake underneath the bike without losing ground clearance, giving it better lean angles than most modern superbikes. And the close ratio 6-speed gearbox meant that when the power hit, it hit like a hammer again, and again, and again. But here's where it gets really spicy. Because by the mid-90s, something happened that no one expected. These little bikes got banned. Not by racetracks, not by enthusiasts, but by laws. Japan's licensing laws started cracking down hard on two-strokes. Emissions were the big target. The NSR250R, even in its restricted form, was blowing way past what the new street laws would allow. Two-strokes are dirty. They burn oil, they shoot out blue smoke, they smell like burned rubber and gas and metal. And regulators didn't like that. So Honda quietly stopped pushing the NSR. They never officially said it was banned, but they made it harder and harder to find. The last model rolled off the line in 1999. It never got a full replacement. And just like that, the best street race 250 in history was gone. Now let's break down what made that engine so unique and why it was seen as a threat. First, the basics. This is a two-stroke engine, which means it fires once every revolution. That's twice as often as a four-stroke. That gives you insane throttle response, fast power delivery, and a sound that screams at the top of its lungs. But two-strokes also need oil to be burned with the fuel, and that's messy. It's also why emissions are a problem. The NSR used a crankcase reed valve induction system. That means fuel and air are pulled into the crankcase under vacuum, then forced into the combustion chamber through reed valves that open and close with pressure. The design gives the engine a strong mid-range hit and quick throttle pickup. The RC valve system on top of that was a power valve in the exhaust port. At low RPMs, the valve stays closed, helping create back pressure for torque. At high RPMs, it opens up to allow full exhaust flow. This gave the bike the ability to behave like two different engines. Torquey down low, wild up high. Add to that the Nikasil-coated cylinder walls. That's an ultra-hard coating that resists wear and keeps the engine running cool, even at high RPMs. Combined with the square bore and stroke, the engine revved smoothly to 12,000 RPM, depending on the model and restrictions. But the hardware wasn't even the wildest part. The PGM series ECUs, especially PGM3 and PGM4, were ahead of their time. They didn't just manage ignition, they used inputs from throttle, gear, and RPM to control timing and power valve actuation. It was smart tech that let Honda make the engine smoother, faster, and more usable, while also locking out full power when needed. That dual purpose is what made the MC28 so controversial. And the smart card? It sounded like something from a science fiction movie. Riders were told they could swap maps on the fly, but in practice, most cards just limited power. If you wanted to unlock full horsepower, you had to get a race card or trick the ECU, and that's when the deregulation wars started. Modders figured out how to bypass the restrictions. You had to change the CDI, trick the gear position input, and rewire the valve control. If you got it right, the bike would scream past 180 kilometers per hour without breaking a sweat. Get it wrong, and you had a broken ECU. This war between restrictions and raw speed created a cult following. People obsessed over jetting, needles, expansion chambers, even the length of the stinger pipe on the exhaust. Every little tweak meant more power or more reliability, or both. These bikes weren't just machines, they were puzzles. Honda didn't build the NSR250R for relaxed riders. It was meant to train future racers. With ultra-short wheelbases, low clip-ons, stiff suspension, and a forward-leaning riding position, it punished anyone who got lazy. You had to keep it revving above 8,000 RPM or it bogged hard. Ride it right, and it was pure magic. Ride it wrong, and it fought back. And that's exactly why it was banned. This wasn't about cheating or rule breaking, it wasn't a safety recall. The NSR250R engine was silenced because it was too good. Too raw. Too race-ready for the real world. Regulators were cracking down on emissions. Insurance companies didn't want to cover kids riding these missiles on public roads. And even Honda saw the writing on the wall. By the time the MC28 came out, Honda knew it was the end. They made the bike heavier. The Pro Arms swing arm looked great but added weight. The Smart Card ECU restricted performance even harder. The chassis was still sharp. The engine still screamed if you uncorked it. But the walls were closing in. In Japan, the 250cc two-stroke market was vanishing. Licensing laws got tougher, pollution rules got stricter, and big manufacturers didn't want the bad press. So in 1999, the NSR250R disappeared from the lineup. Honda never made a replacement, but that didn't stop the fans. Across the globe, people started importing these bikes. In Australia, tuning shops popped up with full dyno setups just to dial in carbs and expansion chambers. In the UK, riders formed NSR clubs, traded de-restriction maps, and showed up at tracks with bikes running smoother than most modern sport bikes. And in the US, where the bikes were illegal for decades, collectors waited patiently for the 25-year rule to pass, just so they could ride one legally on the street. And now that they can, these bikes have exploded in value. A clean MC21 with a de-restricted ECU, jaw pipes, and fresh tires can fetch over $10,000. An MC28 in Repsol colors with the full smart card set? Even more. The MC21, in full power, makes around 60 horsepower at 11,500 RPM. That's more than 240 horsepower per liter. That's MotoGP level from the late 80s. And all this from a bike that weighs 132 kilograms dry. That gives it a power-to-weight ratio close to a superbike. But it handles tighter, brakes later, and corners harder than anything with more than 600 cc today. The bike uses a close ratio 6-speed gearbox. On the SP models, it came with a dry clutch, loud, raw, and pure. It wasn't just for sound. A dry clutch reduces rotational mass and delivers faster shifts. Combined with the light flywheel effect of the two-stroke engine, gear changes are lightning quick. Now look at the chassis. The frame is a twin-spar aluminum design, welded by Honda's Race Team division. Suspension on the SP models is fully adjustable, front and rear, tuned for aggressive riding. Steering geometry is sharp and twitchy, which is perfect for tight corners but brutal on long straight highways. Wheels were 17 inches front and rear, with the rear often being a fat 4.5-inch wide rim, wide enough to run modern sticky rubber. Brakes were twin-piston calipers with drilled, vented rotors. Not the biggest, but on a bike this light, more than enough. Every part of this bike was overbuilt for the street and underappreciated in its time. And the MC28? That's the most controversial of them all. Yes, it looked stunning. The Pro Arm single-sided swing arm is gorgeous. The digital dash was ahead of its time. But the weight went up. The ECU locked down power tighter than ever. And the smart card system made tuning a nightmare. Even now, de-restricting an MC28 is a serious job. You need a race card, a bypass circuit, or a full aftermarket ECU. And even then, the bike's wiring harness doesn't like being tampered with. It's sensitive and expensive. But once it's fully uncorked, the MC28 sings. De-restricted, it can exceed 190 kilometers per hour, and it accelerates brutally fast, well under 5 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour. On a track, it feels like a baby GP bike, perfectly balanced for corners, with a punch that surprises even modern 600s in the twisties. And that's the shocking truth. Honda didn't ban the NSR250R engine because it was broken. They didn't pull the plug because it failed. They let it go because it was too good, too fast for its size, too dirty for new laws, too advanced for regulators to trust the public with it. It was the last of its kind, marking the end of an era when street bikes were allowed to be crazy. Before electronics, emissions, noise tests, engine maps, and traction control. The NSR250R was built for people who wanted a taste of GP racing on real roads. It was raw, dangerous, technical, and now it's a legend. A machine that never stopped being great, just outlawed by time.